Hello and welcome to Skeleton Songs.
Welcome, one and all, to our enchanted fireside.
It is quite enchanted. I don't know if anyone else listening to this at all is British, but if you are, it's been raining, I think, literally every day, which I know is a hilarious cliche.
37 days or something.
Which I actually really like, because I am both actually such homebodies that I like nothing better than being inside with my cats, doing art, while it rains outside, and I can light a candle. I mean, I'm basically a 16th century artist.
We just got a new track from our composer, the insanely talented JW from Public Service Broadcasting.
He's so good.
Dedicated to winter, because what we're doing in the game, we've got between 2 and 4 tracks in any given scene. So they play in an ambient way, but they mix and match vibes. So the Soviet side of Berlin, for example, you'll be playing the Ministry's theme, and also winter, and also something else relevant. But we said you're leaning to the beauty of winter, not the hostility of it. And so it sounds sort of like looking out of a window at Christmas.
It does.
But without any sleigh bells or any of that nonsense.
We were saying, what JW is really good at doing is giving slightly interesting spins on briefs. I mean, I say slightly interesting, very interesting. But so, for example, you might suspect that somebody who wasn't that interested in what was going on, you say, can you give me a winter track? And like AK says, it would be all sleigh bells and sparkling, sound effects to make it sound like snow. And that's gorgeous, but we're always interested in stuff that comes from a slight angle. And what he's come back with is something that actually sounds quite positive. I think it is reminiscent of another track on the soundtrack as well, because we wanted a specific connection between winter and, of course, Keon, which
the
is
City of Snow.
City of Snow, exactly. And yeah, he's just done a really magical job. I feel like we've got so much music now from him. I'm really happy with where the soundtrack is going, but I also am really frustrated because we can't really share it very easily. Like I've been playing around with the idea of maybe sharing 4 bars or something, but that doesn't really give you any idea. And I wouldn't want John to have his work shared in a form that he wasn't happy with. Some artists are very happy for their work in progress to be shared. Some artists are really unhappy about it. And I wouldn't want him to
He's pretty down to earth, so maybe
but you know what I mean. But even
still,
then, I'd have to share a whole song, right?
Yeah, that's it.
But we'll figure something out, because the music direction is something we haven't done before in this project, and I'd love to talk about it.
And he's.
I suppose we could do a sort of kazoo version.
Well, what I was thinking is actually the reverse is
a trombone version.
We could talk a bit more. We could go through with you check with him first. A lot of the gloss he's given us around the tracks, and talk about some of the things he's chosen. So he's chosen, in some cases, unusual keyboards. He's got a sort of collection of keyboards with slightly different acoustic properties.
Yeah, we've been to his studio. It's amazing. It's an Aladdin's cave of musical beauties.
And the Carapace cross track, which is great. What was it? Kalimba? It's a
Kalimba. It was a plucked sort of metal piano type guitar cross thing. You can Google it. And he has fed that instrument through a bunch of different effects so that they come out with something that is reminiscent of the Carapace Cross's themes, which include things like, alien stuff, so it doesn't sound like a traditional kind of human-centric melody. It's got this echoing quality, and he's managed to get this really almost like skin-crawlingly effective sort of insect vibe. I'm not a big fan of insects generally. I don't think he played it backwards. I think he just did.
Recorded it backwards. I mean, played it.
I think it was more about sort of resonance and things. Anyway, we
could dig some of that stuff out.
And I think also people would be interested to see your list of names and the art direction for some of it, because
that's a
just
good point.
Anyway, so you're now listening to a meeting of planning. So I hope you're glad you tuned in to this podcast. This, to be fair, that is quite indicative of game dev. So true. You can roleplay being a game dev and having lots of meetings about spreadsheets.
Want to dream big. You have been drawing people this week.
I have. I love that. One of my sadnesses in this project is that a lot of, I would say almost all of the environment art is being done by our freelancer Adrian, who is fabulous, but it does make me feel a bit sad that I'm not contributing as much art as I would like. But, the nature of being a 2-person team is I've got lots of other things I need to do, so that's just reality. But one of the things I am doing a lot of is drawing people. So this sprint, I have been focused on the members of the Rosemundi crew. So the Rosemundi, for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, is the circus at the centre of Travelling at Night, and they are the caravan troupe that you travel around our alternate history 1940s Europe with. So they form the transient core of the game. Therefore, it's very important that there are lots of people there who you care about, because most people care about people. And we are some of those people who care about people. So I have been drawing people. So we spoke a lot earlier at the start of the sprint about art direction. The way it works is you come to me with the characters, vaguely realised. Usually you haven't done that much writing for them before I get to the art. So you give me some high-level art direction, things like, their ethnicity and age and what aspects they're associated with. That's always something we take into account. And usually you come to me with some very helpful real-world people that they sort of remind you of. So, for example, I guess we could contrast two men in the troupe. So we've got Floris and Lazar. That's how you say it, right?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I don't.
I've been saying
Dutch,
Lazare, but he's not Italian, so it probably isn't that.
So I assume it's just Floris, but.
Floris and Lazar, yeah. So these are interesting contrasts because they are both comparable in age. They're both men. They're both in love with the same lady, another one of the troupe members called Sidonie, who's a very beautiful but slightly overambitious starlet. And Floris is the classic romantic lead. He's got, chin till Tuesday. He's gorgeous. He's got this curly blonde hair. He knows it, but he doesn't make too much of it. He just is very handsome.
One of the key features of the circus is that it's the Commedia della Sole, which is the.
Sorry, can I just contrast with Lazar before we move on, because this is going to be...
Yeah, please do, sorry, yeah.
And just to contrast with Floris, in terms of the visual design, we've got his friend Lazar, who is the opposite of him, really. He's a sort of pale, etiolated, interesting comedic actor whose trousers are too short because his limbs are quite long, and he makes up for what he lacks in physical beauty in immense amounts of comedy and personality. So both of them, I think, come out kind of equal in terms of the attractiveness scale, but in very different physical ways.
Yeah, Floris is
like
you said, you. So I was going to build on the Floris thing. In Commedia della Sole is based on the real world Commedia dell'arte, the Italian tradition from which we know, like Pierrot and Columbine and Pantalone and all the rest of it, the masked physical comedy. And Commedia dell'arte actors tended to associate themselves with one or other mask. You get somebody, people really sort of sought out typecasting and would focus on one thing. And there were the roles were often called masks because you generally played masks, and that was the association. But a few roles were unmasked masks. People just played barefaced, and obviously the people who tended to play the barefaced roles were the hot ones. And Floris plays one of the unmasked masks because he's hot.
Why
and
would you
confident.
Cover that up?
Whereas the guy,
let us all soak it in.
Precisely, and Nina likewise, and. Lazar hides behind the Pierrot mask because obviously, and it
which
mimics
he shouldn't. I think he's got a gorgeous face, but it's an unusual face.
It is an unusual face,
but good intel.
Who else we got?
Well, I mentioned Sidonie, the starlet.
I think for the post today, some people hadn't seen some of the other characters as well, and they've been established.
Well, somebody was very excited to see Aaron Peel. Anyone listening to this who's played Culture Simulator or Book of Hours almost certainly knows of Aaron Peel, who is a knock-long. Is that a correct? He's complicated.
He's complicated. He's got connections with Knock and with Heart, and of course, since everything in the world went sideways, he doesn't have the same status he used to. And without giving anything away, some of the people who are at the circus really couldn't make their way in the world outside the circus.
There's I think we mentioned on a previous episode the concept of cutaways, which are the kind of little nooky things that you can discover in a scene. And one of the cutaways is Aaron's nest, as it's called, which is one of the tents in the Rosamundi. And I think that really gives some lovely insight into a character that we have known and loved for many years now in different games. But you really do get a sense of a really, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil or anything, a really interesting gent who perhaps is on his uppers a little, but is still fascinatingly rich in lore and personality.
I'm very fond of Aaron. He first showed
He's
up
really
in the Exile
charming, isn't he?
DLC. I mean, he showed up in the books, but he sort of shows up and smokes a cigarette at you and says something cryptic and saunters off into the night in the Exile DLC. And he hasn't got any less cryptic since then.
He's a charming boy. Yes, we've got him. We've also got Bronek, who is a very powerful Polish gentleman who plays the traditional sort of old man character. in the greedy old man character, I believe, in the Commedia dell'arte stereotype. We have Monica Medina, who is another name that people who have played our previous games might have come across. She is the author, not an actor. She is the author of a number of plays, which you find as books, in Cult of Simulation, Book of Hours. I think most notoriously The Queens of the Rivers, which ends rather impressively. So I'm very excited to see that make an appearance. And she's cool, like I said, because she's a slightly older lady. She's been around, she's seen some stuff. And she puts all of it into her plays, which is great. Who else do we have?
Well, I think I was just going to say he's easy to write off as one note, but he's got stuff. You know what? I don't want to spoil that. Okay, go on.
But we can officially say he's not on note, which I would hope that people would assume with your writing. But yeah, so overall we've got a bunch of. I think those were the totally new ones from what I've been doing today. But we have some older characters that people are already aware of. So we have Torg, who is one half of a edge dyad, but he's complicated about that in the game. We have Chima, who again is a recurring character. You'll have met her in, I think, was she introduced in Exile? She was, yeah. So she was another Exile introductory lady, but she also appeared again in Book of Hours, and she can be actually one of your companions in the game, we think. But you find her for the first time performing in the Rosamundi Circus. We have, of course, Spencer, the main character of Travelling at Night, whom you play, and you can choose to play a variety of roles in that troupe. We have Medea, who is the, how can we say this on Galentine's Day? I would say not necessarily rival of Nina, but she is the alternative of Nina, who is our gorgeous central character and hero art lady with the white hair. I'm sure I've forgotten somebody, but you get the picture. It's a really interesting motley crew.
So that's the other thing is Spencer and most likely Vincent turn up at Rosamundi.
Lovely Vince.
Spencer's immediately, in order to travel with him, he has to do a job of work. And fortunately, he used to be a stage magician, so he's comfortable performing, so he can step into a couple of different roles in the performance mechanic. Vincent is just really charming, will have a go at anything. So
he's just happy to be there.
There's a thing that somebody said about the talented and charismatic actor Clive Owen, which I thought was mean, but somehow true, which is that Clive Owen is the kind of person, if your actor went missing, somebody might say, I know this bloke, he's not really an actor, but he's a really nice guy. And I'm sure it'd be good just to turn up. And
it's so rude.
It's so rude, because he's a good actor. He also does have this slightly...
You kind of know what they mean.
Yeah, hapless air. And Vincent's a bit like...
I think that's a good touch point. We didn't use him for the design, but in terms of the character, no, they don't, but that's very on point.
I think the first companion in a CRPG is always a bit of a challenge, because you...
They tend to be the best, don't they?
Well, they tend to be either the best or you think of Mort, aren't you? Or the most boring. There's a guy in the first BioWare Star Wars CRPG who's called something I can't even remember, but he's this bland, likeable, handsome bloke who's got a backstory, but a lot of people find quite boring, because you don't want to give anybody too indigestible first off, because people have a bad reaction to them. They'll give up and move on. And I went through around a couple of iterations with Vincent. I thought, should we just impose him on people, so you have to have a companion at the beginning? And I thought, no, because
people
however charming I make him, 5% of people find him annoying, and people don't like things being imposed on them. Even though you have to, you can't let them wander Europe entirely. I'm not Bethesda, and I can't, produce an entire continent. And in the end, I just thought, well, let's patch it over. So the game outright tells you probably want to take him with you. We'll give you a skill bonus, and he's great, but you can leave him here anyway. Your destiny's up to you, and you can. And then I have to write around the possibility of Vincent staying on team for the rest of the game. But that's the RPGs. Baby.
That's what we've chosen.
Yeah.
That leads us on to a mailbag question, if you want to pick it up there.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, somebody wrote in, let me just read this here. Somebody we will call Michael, who was asking about New Vegas, for example, so Fallout New Vegas. So he was saying, in a CRPG, when you do an action that fundamentally changes lots of things. So his example is killing Caesar, who's this big baddie in Fallout New Vegas. How do you write around that? Because it would have to have a significant effect on the world. But of course, you can end up very quickly doing insane amounts of content work for a game that most people won't see. And your example of Vincent is a great example. You can have him as a companion all the way through the game, which is a huge amount of content, which has to also be meaningful, right? Because companions are one of the most important parts of a CRPG. You're supposed to really connect with these people, and if you don't, I think that's a bit of a failure on the part of the game. But you also have to give people the role-playing opportunity of deciding, I don't like that guy and I don't want to go around with him, in which case, what do you do?
So Michael also had a question about the background as well, about the status of India in the Empire, and the long-standing tradition is that I don't answer lore or background questions except in the game, because I got myself in a pickle in like 2016 when people asked me questions about the game, and I then had to be consistent with the things I tossed off as lore for years to come. Anyway, you don't want to hear the author speak, you want to hear the work speak. So those, I'm afraid, tend to be ruled out as mailbag questions. But the other side of it I can talk about, and I think the best way to put this is one hand washes the other. So on the one hand, you're looking for ways to show the actions of players in the game. But on the other hand, you are looking for actions that players can take that can show results without being too expensive. So you might, to choose completely hypothetical examples, genuinely hypothetical examples, not
you did sound sneaky.
You might say in chapter 1, they decide whether to set the sun on fire or not, and if they set the sun on fire, then the sky turns red for the rest of the game. And you can do that by changing the colour of the skybox in every scene, and then you feel like it's changed. Of course, it stops being interesting quite quickly, but you see that gross physical change. I mean, in Sun to Sea, we started changing the physical appearance of items, the images that appeared, based on some of the narrative choices you take. And I wish you thought of it earlier, but it was a really effective thing that just said, you know what, we're listening, and the games that listen to you are very exciting. So you want to pick things that can have an effect. You sometimes also want to pick things that will have an invisible effect, because obviously if you show all the effects, you go mad. But if you only ever pick things that have no visible effects at all, that's boring. So you can see this. I'm sure you can think of examples from CRPGs. So sometimes people have picked things that have consequences. Everyone disappears from the streets of the town, or a different flag goes up. But a lot of the time, it's just happened over the horizon. And this is one of the instinctive things that... Not instinctive things. This is one of the things that becomes apparent the more games you engage with, either as a player or a designer, is that consequences flow from choices, otherwise they don't feel like choices. But the choices you are given are a tiny, minuscule set of the choices you might be given. I could walk out of the flat today and, if I wanted to dismay my wife, become a Benedictine monk, or travel to Morocco, or open a pub. And games generally won't allow you that. I mean, they cannot allow you that kind of freedom. Even in something like GTA, it's very difficult to become a Benedictine monk unless there's a plot about joining a monastery.
Yeah.
So you select the small number of choices that you want people to have. Sometimes you select them because you want them to tie into the themes of the game. Sometimes you select them because they correspond to skills or role-playing choices that people might want to make. Sometimes you can show consequence. Sometimes because you got to fill some content space and you think, I don't know, you could do this, couldn't you? You can tell again in the CRPG when they've got the junior writer to fill in some of the space around the back because it won't connect to anything much. Or it's not always the junior writer. Sometimes you'll get somebody just filling in popcorn quests, having fun. But I think is this a thing? How do you counter it in game design? You counter it partly by picking the right choices, partly by finding ways to show effects that are sort of effectively synecdochic. Like if I said raise a flag earlier. If you raise a different flag, the ones
that leap to mind for me, which I find
and partly you just expect people to deal with it because you cannot show every example, and there's only so many hours in the world.
I was going to say, so just to make a sort of concrete example of what you were saying, if I understand correctly, what you're suggesting is that rather than saying, right, well, you can actually murder Vincent and you can put his head in a stick and waggle it around all the rest of the game, which would require you to write loads of content that would have to reflect that, what you're saying is the option is people can either leave somebody where you find them, in which case that's fine, or you can bring them, in which case you essentially unlock some new content rather than having to sort of write. And I guess that's the point, right? Rather than giving these choices which are kind of impossible to allow the game to respond to, you carefully choose which choices to offer in the first place because you want to write those effects in game. And I was going to say, to give an example that always strikes me as charming when I play an RPG, and I totally agree with you, the responsiveness of a game, feeling like you're in dialogue with the game, feeling like the game is listening to you is some of the most rewarding feeling I think you can get from a game. So anyone who's played Skyrim, for example, you will notice that the barks that people say to you as you walk through a town, for example, will vary depending on your character. So if you are a particular race, they will say something different to you. If you are a particular class, if you're the head of the Mages Guild, this stuff is said to you, and I imagine that's quite a effective but simple behind the scenes thing, right? They record a bunch of dialogue that says, hello Mr. Head of the Mages Guild, and they either play it if you have I am Head of the Mages Guild ticked somewhere in the game files, or they don't if you don't have that ticked. But what it says to the player is, I recognise your position and I'm responding to you in the way that a human would respond to seeing somebody of high authority going through the square of this town, who, yada yada. So that, I think, is a great example. And another example, again, of a fairly simple implementation that has a big effect is the classic turning Mars green thing. So I can think of lots of games where basically you find a place and then you make it better. So, you might find a derelict house and then you do a quest, and the next time you go there are flowers growing in the garden and all the rubbish is gone. And again, what that is, I'm simplifying here, but broadly speaking, that's a matter of asset swapping. So you get your artist to do a derelict house and then a nice house, and once the quest is completed, again, assuming there's a checkbox somewhere in the game files, it says this person has completed quest, tick. So now, boom, we get the nice asset. And again, that feels rewarding and like you are having an impact on the world, but it doesn't have to worry about what Michael has written in to ask about, which is, but what if you do one of 500 million different things, and how do we reflect that? It says, don't worry about that. What matters is that you made this place nicer, and now visually you can see it.
You've reminded me of something. You're right, and I think turning Mars green is a great way to characterise it. A lot of CRPGs, not ours, we don't have the resource, tip over into building or improving your home to the point where
I'd love that,
but maybe in DLC. But Fallout 4, you've got an entire flipping building simming thing. But in Fallout, if you've got a body inside a house, you can probably, you can track it outside. It'll disappear, I think, when you come back. But you can pick it up and it will ragdoll around as you drag it into the back garden and leave it. I played a lot of hours of The Long Dark.
That's a beautiful game, isn't it?
Hinterland Games. So it's a very quiet post-apocalypse in Canada where you're trying to survive in northern Canada. After all the comms have gone down, so it's just you, whatever wood you can gather,
and some bears,
and some bears, and so you're spending a lot of time fitting out your home and organising your resources in a sort of post-apocalyptic way. And one or more of the places you can pick as a home base has a corpse in the corner, a frozen corpse.
Really?
Yeah. Oh. And so you're building everything in this camp up, and there's this Eddie sitting there looking reproachful,
ruining the mood.
And like a year ago or so, Hinterland finally addressed this. I'm not saying they took too long to address it. It was obviously it's not a straightforward thing. One of the reasons they didn't address it was they're Canadian and they didn't want to have you do anything too undignified. You drag the body outside and throw the stone. So what you got now is you can spend some time and calories or an option on the corpse. It's called something like dispose of respectfully, and you get a timer and it just quietly disappears. We don't ask about where, it's just been tactfully shuffled off. The three other things I wanted to say were, first of all, the other way you deal with consequence is, this is really my sort of contribution to game design over the course of my career, is resource-based narrative, is finding more abstract or poetic ways of representing the changes you've made in the world. Your nightmares increase. or the serenity goes down. It's not an idea uniquely I have, but it's been a specialism. But that doesn't remotely solve all the problem. It's useful to give it a general sense of the game listening to you. But if you kill Caesar and the world doesn't change, except unrest goes up, then you feel a bit cheated. So it's a limited tool. Another thing, a lot of my work has been in primarily text-based games over the years. So for London, you could actually increase unrest, and in principle that might be a really big change because there's no graphics that look different. In practice, of course, it's very difficult to make sure that all future content and all existing content reacts differently based on the unrest going up or down, and also that it doesn't unbalance it given the number of other things that might increase or decrease unrest. And you can do it more through mechanics and that's what content becomes available, but that's a whole different problem. What was the third thing? Caesar dies, flags rise. Oh yes, that was it. The more things change, the less you care about things changing. So if every event you have in the world, that can happen in the world, has a knock-on effect and it changes some sort of complex background sandbox, that paradoxically means that things in the foreground become less interesting when you change them, because you just, everything's shouting at you the whole time. Whereas if you've got the ludic equivalent of like a sort of peaceful near silence, every so often you hear a piano note plink out and you notice the piano notes where you wouldn't if it was full on rock and roll. So I think sometimes, in terms of how do you deal with it, it's you pick the things you want to deal with, which takes us back to you pick the choices you want to allow people and you pick the things you want to do. One hand washes the other, which also means that you can spend a lot of time planning for what could change and couldn't change. In the end, you have to pick a direction and go with it.
That's really interesting when you put it like that, because it brings to mind something that I know you and I feel almost physical pain when we see. Maybe people listening can think of a situation that this didn't apply, but when I see a game that is quite early on in development, usually at sort of crowdfunding, Kickstarter level, and these incredibly enthusiastic, probably desperately talented developers in their pitch suggest that they're going to create something like a living world that will go on, right? That will go on around the player, and people will be making choices and things will be changing, and all that kind of really high concept, interesting stuff. I'm sure you can think of examples where this has been something that people have said. Number one, I don't think I can't think of a single game that has managed to achieve that effectively. Not for want of trying, but I just think it's a really difficult thing to do. But with your point about basically if everything changes, nothing matters, this is compounded in two ways by that. One, if everyone's constantly making decisions and changing in a meaningful way, then you stop caring about it, because in the same way that, I like our neighbours, but I don't know what they're doing right now, and what they're doing right now isn't going to have an impact on my life. I think the same is true of a game where all the NPCs are doing their own thing. Like, it doesn't really affect the main character, so why would the main character care that much until they come occasionally into contact with them? But two, it's not about the player, so it's a double whammy. The player isn't involved, and also if everything's changing, nothing matters. I'm
going to cite three much more significant game designers than me. The first is as significant as you get.
Is this the saint?
It's the immortal Saint Sid Meier, one of whose aphorisms was that the games where the player is having fun and games where the designer is having fun. And
that's true in English literature as well. In all literature, I'm sure.
Writers writing about writers writing.
Well, writers about writers writing is, I think, just toe curling almost all of the time. But no, I meant more. You get novels that are really, really enjoyable to read as the reader, and then you get novels that are fantastically constructed and very clever, like Ulysses, which are brilliant for the author. But when you read them, you want to knock your own teeth out with a shoe. Like it's a very notable difference in experience. But people do it for a reason, which is they're enjoying it, and obviously you have to enjoy game design to some extent, even if you're selfishly designing for the delight of your players, because why else would anyone do it? It's not the freaking money. And but it's easy to get seduced down the routes that interest you. And the thing is, one of the things with sort of the living world thing, you think, and what if, and again, people do living world
systems up to a point, but I think a lot
up
of
to a point, but that's not what the promise is.
That's it. A lot of the art of it is that you decide what that point
is. And
exactly,
this goes back to your earlier point about saying, you choose what decisions to give the player.
Precisely. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. You're always reading out far more things than you're reading.
Not just like Gerald 5 states away is doing some stuff. It's not interesting.
So the second authority is Mark Rosewater, who I think it's Mark Rosewater was one of the big Magic the Gathering designers for a long time. He used to talk about a complexity budget, that you in a game you have an art budget and you have a memory budget for what you can actually fit in the computer. Less relevant these days, it's still relevant, but you also have a complexity budget in terms of what the player is prepared to absorb and what's interesting before it starts clashing with the other elements of the game. Paradox games notoriously go wild with their complexity budget and have a player base that likes it, but it's still a problem. And generally, all else being equal, the less complex a game is, to achieve a particular effect, the better. It's easy to debug, it's easy to balance, it's easy to learn. It means that if you add things, it's likely to break.
Easy
but
to learn,
a lot of us
like
complex games, so it's not a straightforward thing. But complexity budget, I've always thought a really helpful heuristic. And the third point is Tyner Sylvester, who obviously designed and built RimWorld, which is one of the most successful games that is all about world models interoperating. This tile's next to that tile, and this tile's hot, so that tile gets hotter. This person's mood is dropping, so they're more likely to act out in a psychotic rage, which sets this building on fire, which makes that tile hotter. It's a big machine that all works together in interesting ways when it works. But this was, I think, the essay I've written that I most enjoyed writing, the rhetorical effects of system design and toilets. I point out that Tyner's built this whole complex world, but your characters don't get thirsty, they don't need a wee, and that's fine. You don't play the game thinking, it really hurts me that we haven't had to lay sewers. In fact, you could get mods to simulate this for you. But lots of other important things in the game are simulated. Temperature is simulated, light is simulated, rainfall happens and it changes terrain. Characters die if they don't have food, but they don't die if they don't have water. Because again, there was a decision. Dwarf Fortress, I think, is a really complex, fluid system where you can see, individual tiles flooding and it floods the ones next to them. This is relevant, but they don't do a lot on the surface. You can't build a ship. Obviously, there's a mod where you can, but you can't build a ship and discover any competent dwarf fortress. Or you could, I suspect, because they simulate the whole world. But it's not something you're meant to do, and you certainly wouldn't simulate like navigation.
Well, and also I think dwarf fortress.
So you always draw a line around what you are actually simulating, and the line around what you're simulating is almost infinitely differentiated. It is infinite really, because the number of things you could simulate is infinite, the number of things you can simulate is finite, but there's a huge difference. I'll shut up, go on.
No, everything you're saying is interesting. I was just going to say, because speaking of the complexity budget, I think it is really telling that your two last examples, RimWorld and Dwarf Fortress, have to they spent a lot of the game's budget overall on the complexity of the simulated game and the systems that underpin it. So both of them have quite pared back graphics. I mean, Dwarf Fortress is infamous. I think it's recently had a graphical overlay upgrade, which I think has opened it up to a lot of players who were put off by how sort of pixely and deliberately abstract it was originally, because that's not what the game is about. The game is about these complicated systems that simulate these astonishing amounts of things beneath the surface. But that comes at the cost of, you can't represent that unless you're going to have a budget of, £1 billion. If you're going to have those complicated systems and you're going to combine that with some sort of realistic visuals, some sort of relevant, responsive sound design, some sort of amazing responsive narrative underpinning, all of that is notably absent from those two games. And this is not a criticism of those two games. Those two games are both fantastic and have clearly done incredibly well. But I just think it's interesting that the complexity budget that you were talking about was, I think, specific to design. But I also think it applies to games as a whole, that if you lean really deeply into one feature, it comes at the cost of the other features, realistically, because you can't do everything all at once in a game.
Definitely. No, I think that's key, is you have to pick the things that you are focusing on, the things that you are good at, things you're capable of doing well. And you reminded me, years and years ago now, when I still did talks, I did one at Ubisoft, and I talked about, I think, among other things, some of the things I've just said, the importance of selecting the individual things you want to represent as outcomes and not trying to go everywhere. And somebody told me, I don't think this is NDA'd, and if it is, it's way out of date. That there was
not listening to the podcast anyway.
No, there's a big internal mandate to focus more on simulation, because the idea was if you had a world system that responded to simulation, then you would have to do less handcrafted content. The goal of game designers through the ages, all the way back through the sort of enthusiasm procedural generation in the noughties and teens, up to some of the current AI mania now. And as far as I can tell, that internal mandate didn't really go anywhere. It may well have manifested in the way they sort of built landscapes. It might be that they had algorithms to show how a river carved out a landscape, and that made the value look differently. But if you play an Ubi game now, this is one of the classic open world ones, or something like that, Division, there's not much in the way of systems driving narrative, because Ubi games are big and complicated and beautiful, and if you did what you did in RimWorld or Draw Fortress,
that's what I mean. It would precisely complexity would be insane. I don't think anybody would have any hardware that could run something like that, never mind the cost of actually making the damn thing.
And when I'm in the mood for something really complicated, I'll go and play Dyson Sphere.
Oh my god, yes.
And give up after 2 days because my conveyor belts become too tangled. And when I'm in the mood for something just fun but beautiful and immersive, I'll play Valhalla. And I think you've got to decide what you're catering to. Well, this is being good value.
Well, I was going to say we haven't got onto the big thing that you've been working on for the last couple of days.
The map.
The map. I love that map.
Yeah.
Words you never thought you'd hear me say.
So what you can do now in our prototype, flipping finally, is you can get on a train and on Team.
You can actually travel.
And actually travel to all the other scenes without needing to dart about with cheat codes. Some of the scenes are effectively a sort of desert of grey sand, if not literally a desert of grey sand. And most of the other ones don't have anything like playable content in yet, but you can bod about, and it's plugged into a couple of the other significant game systems. One of which is that travelling Europe in 1948 is administratively complicated. That you need to make sure you have the right papers, or the substitute of the right papers, to be able to get into not only northern France from southern France, because in our alternate history we've still got this sort of Vichy relic in the south, but into the Soviet bloc, or into Berlin, which is currently blockaded. And that drives a chunk of the plot and allows you alternatives to get through. So that's in. And it's called Travelling at Night. So I feel it's only time after like a year's development that we actually implemented that, and that means I can now go through and finish implementing the critical path through the whole game, which is the next step. And I'm very happy with how it's turned out. Here's a sort of game dev mini anecdote. Lottie, let me ask you a philosophical question. What determines where a player is in the game world?
You just asked me this to humiliate me.
No.
I mean, it would be where the player character, what scene the player character is in.
There we go. So what scene the player character is, and what their like X and Y things are. But that's not the only way of saying where somebody is, because every destination on the map corresponds to one or more scenes, and if it's or more scenes, then okay, I think all of these destinations only have one access point. But if you flipped the map, you want to be able to know where am I. So we have to make sure there's a system that is a very simple system.
Well, I suppose so. To give an example, if you are in the sanitarium in Antibes, are you in the sanitarium? Yeah. Are you in Antibes or are you in France? I mean, you're in all of these things at once, but according to the game, you can't be in 3 places at once. You
are, and there's a data structure where there's a destination which knows that the sanitarium scene is in that destination, Antibes, and Antibes also has a connection to a country, which is France, which has certain entry requirements. But as far as the game's concerned, scenes are just files that the game pulls data about how to position assets out of. You know, you're in the world, you're always unambiguously in one place, and someone's cut you in bits and thrown you in the river. And
which I don't think can happen in a game.
You know, where you are is a sort of fictional construct. So which scene you're in is important, and then which destination, which location you're in on the map is a separate thing. And then one thing that got me into a pickle this morning when I was tidying up some code is where you are on the map, because we don't want to load you into a different scene until you finish travelling around. We don't want to load screen every time you change towns. You don't want to stop off. Where you are on the map is a different thing again from which destination the player thinks they're in. So
that is difficult.
I remember years ago working on Sunless Sea, I said we need to make sure that the player's level of fear is affected by the amount of light that's around them. And Liam, the coder, said, well, what do you mean by light? And I was like, well, light, like, you know, look at the windows, light coming through it. I understood less about Unity now. And it's like, right, well, light, do you mean the light that is shed by light sources? Do you mean the colour of the sea around them? Do you mean an arbitrary value that is calculated by their distance from something which is calculated as a field?
And you flipped the table.
I did.
And stormed out.
I said, I don't care, time is money, you're fired.
I quite. But you see, all of this, you know, it's all terribly interesting and knowledgeable, but really what you should have told everyone listening is the most important thing about the map, which is that when you click to go to a new location, the line does a little Indiana Jones animation.
I'm charmed by how much you love this.
It's so charming. I have a profound, bone-deep instinct that everybody's going to love this, because everyone likes that motif. This kind of deliberately retro, incredibly sweet, except it's not, you know, we'll have cool music and everything. It's not like cutesy, but the line that shows the route from A to B goes red and then like quite quickly, but, you know, gently animates, showing your progress across the map. And I just think it's such an effective, simple
because
way.
I put the easing in, because it speeds up and slows down.
Well, the easing is amazing. I mean, we love all kinds of easing, but I think it's just so effective.
I hope people share enthusiasm. I suspect they may not share the degree of enthusiasm.
No, that's possible.
But you're a very bright soul. But maps are interesting, aren't they?
Ugh, I've already been nice about maps.
No, but I don't mean. I mean, maps are interesting problems. So lots of games have overworld maps. Having gone into an overworld map, they realise there's well, you know, as I just said, there's more than one way to define where a character is in a game, and that goes for sort of design as well as for tech. So if you go into an overworld map in a CRPG, are you going to click on a different city and travel there? Are you going to have what is your experience of travelling there? Is it a transition that might be interrupted by a random action, or are you simulating something else
what's
as
the
well?
point of the map?
And what difference is it made? What is the difference between a fast travel system and the map you travel about on? Often it's nothing, because if you had the budget, you might do an open world like flipping Bethesda or Ubi or whoever. Often there is some additional valence to it, which we're capturing with and travelling at night with entry requirements for cities, paperwork, how exciting. And
tell that to Papers, Please.
And well, there you go. But planning out, you know, where you're going to do performances, because they don't like you performing the player and the people in the Soviet Union, and the traces where you've been allow people to catch up with you.
So one of the things.
So there's that extra valency.
Yes, so I think maps, you know, firstly, there's all different kinds of maps. You know, what are we talking about? We're talking about a fast travel global map. Are we talking about a local map? Are we talking about a mini map as you're travelling around? You know, all these different types already show the different uses of maps. But also, then what are you trying to tell people with a map? Now, with a basic map is just, here is where stuff is. You can go to some stuff, right? That's fundamentally what a map is. But there are other uses of maps. So in Travelling at Night, for example, I looked at a lot of 1940s maps at the time, and they were a hell of a lot. One of my fun facts about my fun facts about the war was that I bought you a replica of I think a 1942 map or something.
Hangs by a sofa.
It does, and there's this Canadian guy who made his career during the war drawing and redrawing maps, and he did it on a regular cadence. I don't know if it was a weekly thing or a monthly thing, but things changed. Geographically and politically, things changed week to week and month to month over the course of the war, as you would imagine. And people didn't know what was going on. People didn't have radio they could trust necessarily. They certainly didn't have helpful broadcasts or internet that could tell them what was going on when, and they could get real-time news feeds into their lives. They had no idea what was going on with the borders of Canada or what was happening in France. So this guy repeatedly got as much intel as he could from his contacts, drew these very beautifully made but fundamentally useful maps, which he annotated with the local information. So it said, the Germans have invaded and are currently sitting in this country, but it's not officially German yet or something, and over here we've had this rebellion which has resulted in this shift in the things, and it was just a repeated, constantly shifting thing. So that's fascinating, right? Because that's now become not just a historical artifact of actually how people got their news in the 1940s, but it also shows at that month in that year, this is what people thought about stuff, and this was specifically what was happening in the whole global war issue. But so I was looking at a lot of maps partly for stuff like that.
I think the particularly interesting thing is that they're all drawn in the same way for the same purpose, the same legend, to the same scale. And you could look at maps of Europe over 500 or 1,000 years, but you can't directly compare a medieval map of the Mediterranean with a 1950s military scale map. It's just a different sort of thing, and the other one did show national borders. But go on, love.
Well, just that I was saying, you've got to pick what the purpose of the map is. So this was to basically keep people apprised of what was going on in the world around them. The map in Travelling at Night wants to be slightly strategic. So we've deliberately gone with this fairly pared back visual style so that we can put things on it like traces that are relevant for people to know. Like, I don't want to go to that city because I've got quite a high number of traces in that city, so I'll go to this different one, right? So you're looking at it with a legend on one side which tells you useful things about what's going on in the world, marked helpfully and symbolically on the map. So I'm hoping that there will be some low-level, satisfying strategy going on from looking at the map that we have designed and implemented, rather than just saying, I want to go there, click, which you will do as well and get the lovely animation, but it's slightly more than just representing the physical arrangement of the world. That's just my point.
So that's so, and more. One of the other things we had very early on in the design process was we wanted the map to be exciting to look at. We wanted
and I will levy with the people listening, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of maps generally. I don't necessarily find maps that interesting, but I do like this one.
What's the capital of Azerbaijan?
I'll find out when I need to know. Azerbaijan city.
I think it's Baku. If I got it wrong, I'll be embarrassed now. The experience you have when you open a fantasy tome, some big chunky swords and sorcery novel before age and life wear on you, and you're no longer excited by such things, and you think, ooh, the glass mountains, I wonder what those are like. Perhaps our hero will go there.
Those maps are great, because what those maps say is, here's the promise of the story.
So that's why,
love that,
at your behest, we scattered a lot of sort of relevant iconography over the map.
Here are the bergs of amber, here are the holes in France.
But it's also why the map took longer for me, because I took the opportunity to do a lot of the writing that needs to go over it. So, when you select a city, it gives you the skinny on what the hell has happened in Hungary during the mythic Cold War, and also a little bit about what's going on in that city. So I'll do probably 2 more passes on each of these, but I wanted stuff in there, and some of it is bits I hadn't decided or researched yet, so that sent me down a series of research rabbit holes from which I'd emerged, saying things to Lottie like, did you know the German officer who led the glider assault to rescue Mussolini from a mountain fortress was of Polish descent? Nobody was prepared to do something so bonkers, and we've now got a much more population fleshed out world, because it's been me essentially sort of asking the internet and a couple of books a series of questions based on what I'm interested, and coming back with specific answers that then get folded back into the background. And a couple of places have changed the shape of the story quite significantly. But again, this is the aim, that you open that map the first time, you think, well, crikey, all those places, I wonder which ones I'll get to go to. And the hybrid model is that we've got a dozen or so major destinations that you can actually explore, and then a whole bunch of minor destinations with a Sun of Sea style little bit of content that you can poke around and feel that you're travelling through something more than just liminal spaces.
But you see, even this comes back to your complexity budget, right? Because I'm just thinking, and I'm sure everyone listening can think of a time that you have seen either an actual map in a game or a book or whatever, or in real life, or you have had the sort of a metaphorical map, some sort of prospect of future engagement with the game or the book or whatever it is that you're dealing with has been spread out before you, and you will remember the times that you went, ooh, that looks amazing, what's over there, and you will also probably remember the times that you thought, oh, there's a lot of that and I'm not really that excited about it. So one of the things that we have to do in our map is make sure that there is a nice balance between stuff that is actually really interesting, that is unusual, that catches people's attention, that makes them want to progress through the game and progress across the map to discover all these delicious things, and I hope that we've got that balance right. But we don't want to be too overwhelming, so when people open the map, particularly because that's probably one of the first things that most people do in a game, you sort of press all the hotkeys and see if it comes up with stuff, so probably the map will be something that you see quite early on. What we don't want to do is massively overwhelm somebody with 100 different blinking icons saying stuff you can do here and words you don't understand yet. And
which has
make
historically
people
been an
feel...
issue with my games.
Well, I was going to say, in hindsight, your complexity budget does seem to be quite swole.
Yeah.
But we're working on that.
But imagine if I hadn't been listening to Rosewater's podcast back in the day, it'd be worse.
You'd be bonkers. You'd be like that meme with the red string. I mean, you're kind of already getting there. But we are trying to address that in this game.
Thanks, wife. Did I tell you? I think I did. So I was doing a bit of digging into the paperwork you needed to get around Europe and across what was fossilising to the Iron Curtain at the time. The document that you needed to travel through the occupied zones, Allied. So at that point, Britain, France, US, and Russia were all still the Allies. But it was pretty quickly the sort of Western zone and the Russian zone. The document you had to travel around Austria and across the zone borders was called the Allied Council's Grey Pass.
It just sounds like it's made up.
It does sound like something that escaped from a
Gandalf did it.
And it was basically a temporary passport with the grey cover. That's why it was called that.
Yeah.
And the Allied Council was this sort of United Nations precursor that was just the four Allied powers, but the Allied Council Grey Pass.
But I love this as well because you talk about how the map reflects the different the actual what was going on in the 1940s in an interesting way with the different borders that we don't recognise now and yada yada. But it also with all of this stuff feeds into the design, right? So you have not only several pieces of identity paper that Spencer uses in travelling at night at various points or needs to get before he can travel places, but we also of course have different currencies because at that time Europe was extremely fractured. We didn't have the euro, so you needed to have different currencies on your person if you were a man travelling around Europe on occult business. So in your inventory you will have a number of different currencies which have then been historically researched by Alexis and myself. And that's a whole different fascinating rabbit hole of what do they look like, how did the value work out, and this was something we were surprised and delighted by in Book of Hours when you initially put in old money, right? So we're not talking about pounds here, we're talking about crowns and halfpennies in Book of Hours, and people really responded to that because we could have made it a central point of the game, but that wasn't the point of the game, and Book of Hours does not suffer from a lack of complexity, I think. But people just felt immediately they were in a different world that was both real but not here anymore, and you could engage with it if you really wanted to and try and break down all the different notes and coins into their respective parts and marvel at how complicated it all was back then, or you could basically click the button that said consolidate and then pay for whatever you needed.
So this is a really good point. I was pleasantly surprised at how the response to Book of Hours validated the choice to do British pre-decimal currency and how entertained the Americans were by the idea of sixpence and threepence. On the other hand, it took a lot of effort, a bunch of which Roman, our contractor, did, to make it fairly seamless to break a fiver into change.
Well done, Roman. It was great.
And to put something in a slot and get it back. And there were lots of little issues. People ended up with sort of pennies sloshing around they couldn't do anything with.
But that was part of the problem with the currency.
But it was. But you don't necessarily want to put all the problem with the currency in the game. I think
this
I
goes
had
back
the
to
ability to drop the penny down the well just to get rid of it. And I put a bunch of effort into researching currencies at the time, and the another bit of fascinating historical trivia, the blockade of Berlin was kicked off by so generally relations between the Western Allies and the Soviets were breaking down at the time. But at the time the Deutschmark was semi-worthless. There's hyperinflation, and Germany's economy was obviously devastated. And the Allies decided to issue a new currency, which they would back, which obviously gave them economic leverage. And the Soviets got wind of this very late on and were cross because they hadn't been consulted. So they responded by blockading Berlin, but also by issuing their own Soviet-backed currency, but because they had to do it at really short notice, where the Americans had printed it over in America and shipped it over. The initial solution was they put little stamps, adhesive stickers over part of the old notes to mark them as worth something under the new regime, but the glue was water solvent, so you couldn't get the money out of the rain, or the stickers would come off. And the thing would become worthless, and obviously, the problems with forgery because these things were made very hastily. And this has come back into our game as in travelling at night. The dollar, the almighty dollar, actually has some occult resonance because it's backed by the coronal incorporates of the US. But anyway, having done all this and got into it and said, "Did you know, Lottie?" And I suddenly realised when I started getting into the purchase stuff, if you're going to Paris and you've got a pocket full of Deutschmarks and Ostmarks and francs and pounds and the francisques of the
I was going to say the Vichy
Rally.
francisques.
Yeah, you go into the shop and dump it on the counter, and the guy says, "Go to a bureau de change." Then this isn't necessarily fun.
No,
as
it
the
doesn't
game
sound very
goes.
fun. I was assuming that basically your tailor would accept whatever.
Yeah, so basically what I settled on, in order to provide some colour but not go mad, is there's currencies that are accepted on one side of the Iron Curtain. There are currencies that are accepted on the other side of the Iron Curtain, all basically mutually interchangeable. And then there's cigarettes. And cigarettes are in 1948 valuable everywhere. Or you can use them as refreshments to top up your aspect pool, which might prejudice our PEGI rating. We won't do an animation.
We've been thinking
for it,
about that.
yeah.
One of my fun, just little things you don't notice. So, for example, you mentioned how easy it was to forge these new currencies that were sort of made in haste in difficult times. And I was drawing the one of the passports that Spencer starts the game with. And I don't know if you've ever Googled a 1940s passport, but you could basically, bodge one together now with whatever you have lying around. It really was a sort of paper book, an A5 paper book stapled together in the spine with a cutout bit in the front for a picture and handwritten information inside. So it'd be relatively, especially by today's standards, obviously, incredibly easy to forge a passport with a different picture in a different handwriting section. And the other thing that I always gives me a chuckle is, because it is the 40s, smoking really was everywhere. We did have a discussion about whether or not we wanted to sort of show everybody smoking in a sort of attractive way, because obviously smoking looks cool, but of course it gives you cancer, so it's not cool. So we didn't want to do that, but we also didn't want to totally not be faithful to the era. So a number of our characters are seen smoking. And as you have mentioned, cigarettes are a currency, because of course they are. But one of the things that always makes me laugh is whenever I'm drawing someone smoking or drawing a cigarette, I always want to put a filter on it, because that's what cigarettes look like now, right? They've got the little orange bit at the end. But in the 40s, they didn't have any filters, because everyone was like, no, stuff in as much asbestos as you want. They're basically cancer sticks. Stick them up. They're great. So I keep drawing these things and thinking, these are death sticks. They haven't even got the orange bit. But I promise that is period appropriate for anyone watching.
I do feel a bit better about all this now. I know that the UK is joining other countries in instituting an age-based ban. So I think my daughter will never be able to smoke legally, for example.
Really?
I think she's sort of that generation.
That's
Assuming
great,
the law
isn't
goes
it?
through. Yeah, I know
That
the
is
New
great.
Zealand's already done it.
I do respect everyone's individual right to live their life, but it's
so I
just
feel
a bad
if somebody's
idea.
25 is playing our game, and they're probably either smoking or not smoking at this point.
How about this? If we do really well with Travelling at Night, and everyone listening, you can help us do this by buying the game at launch. If we do really well at night,
Planning.
we will release a physical version of Travelling at Night, which comes with a free pack of chocolate cigarettes.
Right.
Boom! Mic drop.
Right.
The best marketing strategy ever.
Fortunately, I'm not the half of the company that deals with the merch, so I don't have to worry
I
about
can
that.
already imagine. I'm seeing it now.
People can be like Donald Glover in Community.
Oh, what you mean, like gorgeous and talented and
Yeah,
great?
whatever.
Oh, he's so great.
He's pretty great.
Should we end on Donald Glover? I feel like maybe we should hold off on the mailbag questions till another episode because we've gone on
let's
about
keep
maps.
the bank. Yeah, we've got a few to go back to. Anything else you want to talk about?
I've been doing a lot of animation, but I think that's time for a different conversation.
There
as
is
well.
some different conversation. Standard stuff. For
Mailbag.
some reason you're listening to this and you haven't wishlisted the game, then you probably should.
I uploaded our trailer to Steam today, so you can watch it again if you want.
If you haven't signed up for the playtesting list and you are interested in playtesting one of the various pre-release versions, then Google Travelling at Night playtest list, you'll find it.
Although we do hope to have a public demo later this year, it's worth saying.
Yes. But which will ultimately fall behind later. Anyway, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it. Mailbag, yes. Send us
Contact
emails
at
saying,
weatherfactory.biz.
why is Aaron's head upside down and full of giraffes? And we'll answer those at some point in the future.
We will. But other than that,
Yeah.
have a spooky day.
Have a spooky day.